The golden opportunity. The rich, woody aroma of the executive's office, usually a soothing presence, now felt suffocating to Dean. He'd navigated the predictable pleasantries, the forced bonhomie, the subtle assertions of dominance, a worn-out dance he knew by heart. Then a subtle shift, an almost imperceptible pivot in the conversation. Sterling, the executive with an unnervingly silken voice, settled deeper into his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Of course, Dean," Sterling purred, a dismissive flick of his wrist accompanying the words. "We appreciate your devotion to your family, but frankly, their involvement with your public image is becoming a burden. We're talking millions here, Dean. Surely you can appreciate the wisdom of refining your brand, perhaps even distancing yourself from certain influences?" The air in the opulent chamber seemed to congeal. Dean's jaw tightened, a solitary muscle twitching beneath his skin. No raised voice, no immediate retort. His eyes, typically warm and open, became chips of flint. The smugness evaporated from Sterling's face, replaced by a flicker of bewilderment, then irritation. Dean simply pushed his chair back, the soft scrape echoing in the abrupt silence. He rose, every movement deliberate, unhurried. He didn't spare a glance for the contracts splayed on the gleaming desk, the figures promising generations of comfort. No parting shot, no veiled threat, not even a look of contempt. He simply turned, walked to the ponderous oak door, and opened it. The crisp coolness of the hallway was a welcome antidote. Sterling, momentarily stunned, called out, "Dean, wait! We can discuss this!" But Dean didn't break stride. The door sighed shut behind him, sealing off not merely a room but an entire future Sterling had meticulously planned. A man of family. The mahogany table, typically a glossy expanse for high-stakes negotiation, felt starkly sterile. Mr. Caldwell, his face a smooth veneer of practiced affability, leaned forward. With a dismissive flick of his wrist, he brushed aside Dean's latest counter-offer. "Frankly, Dean," he began, a patronizing lilt inflecting his voice, "this is beyond generous. We're discussing a man whose family carries a reputation for being, shall we say, rather demanding." Dean's usual effortless smile tightened into a brittle line. The atmosphere thickened, charged with unspoken resentments. Caldwell, oblivious, continued, "Your wife, your children, they're a liability to your public persona. Our aim is to forge you into a brand, not a sideshow." The executive vaguely gestured, as if swatting an irritating insect. Dean's typically warm eyes sharpened into shards of glacial ice. He neither raised his voice nor slammed his fist. Instead, he pushed his chair back with a soft, resonant scrape that punctured the abrupt silence. Caldwell blinked, a fleeting confusion crossing his features as Dean rose, to his full height. "I believe our discussion has concluded," Dean stated, his voice a low, unmistakable rumble of finality. He pivoted, his gaze sweeping the opulent office, briefly snagging on a framed photograph of Caldwell's own beaming family. Without another syllable, he departed, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him like a definitive lock. Caldwell called after him, "Dean, what about the figures? The millions?" But the corridor was empty, save for the lingering trace of Dean's costly cologne. He was never seen there again, the negotiation dance. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the opulent chandelier, reflecting the tense faces of the studio executives. Across from them, Dean Martin, impeccable in a tailored suit, leaned back, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. The air hummed with figures, $7, then $8, then almost $10 million. Contract clauses were dissected, percentages debated, the future of a blockbuster franchise laid bare. Then Harrison, the studio's lead negotiator, a man whose reputation was built on ruthless efficiency, leaned forward. His voice, usually a smooth baritone, took on a condescending edge. "Look, Dean, we appreciate your unique approach to family life, but for this kind of money we need assurances. No more impromptu vacations to visit your mother, no more bailing out that troublesome cousin of yours." Dean's smile vanished. The room, which had been buzzing with the low murmur of ambition, fell silent. His eyes, usually warm and mirthful, hardened into chips of obsidian. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even shift in his seat. He simply pushed his chair back with a soft scrape against the polished floor. The sound, almost imperceptible, echoed like a gunshot. He stood, his gaze sweeping over each executive, lingering briefly on Harrison, who now looked a shade paler. Without a word, without a backward glance at the multi-million-dollar offer lying on the table, Dean turned and walked towards the heavy double doors. The executives watched, stunned, expecting him to pause, to reconsider. He didn't. The doors swung shut behind him, a definitive thud marking the end of the negotiation. Harrison, jaw slack, whispered, "He'll be back, he has to be." But the silence that followed was a heavy, undeniable answer. The fatal slip, the mahogany table, usually a silent arbiter of fortunes, now amplified the executive's smug chuckle. "Honestly, Dean, a man of your background should appreciate the finer points of a binding agreement, especially when it involves your extended family's future." Arthur Sterling leaned back, a thin smile playing on his lips, oblivious to the subtle stiffening in Dean's posture. The air, thick with expensive cigar smoke and the scent of success, suddenly felt acrid. Dean's eyes, usually warm and mirthful, had turned to chips of obsidian. "My background?" Dean's voice was a low rumble, barely audible, above the hum of the air conditioning. Sterling, misinterpreting the quiet as acquiescence, pressed on. "Yes, well, let's just say some connections are best kept distant. For appearances, you understand." He gestured dismissively with a manicured hand, implying a network of unsavoury relatives. Dean pushed his chair back with a soft scrape that resonated like a thunderclap in the sudden silence. He rose, his movements fluid and deliberate, the expensive suit jacket settling perfectly on his broad shoulders. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't even glance at the meticulously drafted contract spread before Sterling. He simply turned, his gaze sweeping over the opulent office, pausing briefly on a framed photo of Sterling's own family. Then, without a single word, he walked to the door. Sterling, still smiling, called out, "Dean, the deal, millions are on the table!" But the door clicked shut with a definitive thud, leaving only the echoing silence and the scent of a future that had just vanished. Sterling waited, expecting the door to reopen, for the star to reappear, humbled by the lure of unimaginable wealth. He waited a long time. Dean Martin never looked back. A silent exit. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the recessed lights, reflecting Mr. Sterling's self-satisfied smirk. Dean had endured the thinly veiled barbs about his unconventional family life for 20 minutes, the studio executive's voice a low, grating rumble. Then came the final dismissive flick of the wrist, a casual remark about his children's lack of proper upbringing. The air in the room thickened, suddenly heavy, as if the very molecules were holding their breath. Dean's jaw tightened, but no muscle in his face twitched. He simply pushed back his chair, the sound a surprisingly loud scrape against the polished floor. Sterling, mid-sentence about creative liberties, paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Dean didn't speak, didn't offer a parting shot. He merely rose, his movements deliberate, unhurried, as if leaving a boring dinner party. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, a small, precise gesture, then turned and walked towards the heavy oak door. Sterling's smirk faltered. "Now, Dean, let's not be hasty," he called out, the confidence in his tone already waning. The millions, the intricate clauses, the future blockbusters, all hung precariously in the balance. Dean didn't glance back. He didn't hesitate. The door closed softly behind him, a sound far more definitive than any slammed fist. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the silent earthquake that had just rumbled through the executive suite. Sterling sat alone, the lavish contract suddenly a worthless scroll of parchment. The silence that followed Dean's exit was deafening, a vacuum where a king's ransom had just evaporated. The empty room, the heavy oak door creaked shut, echoing the finality in Dean's stride. His tailored suit, usually a beacon of casual elegance, seemed to radiate a cold indifference as he walked past the bewildered secretaries. Mr. Harrison, his face a mottled crimson, spluttered from the doorway of the now empty boardroom. "Dean, wait! This is millions we're talking about!" Dean didn't break stride. He pressed the elevator button, the soft chime a counterpoint to Harrison's increasingly frantic pleas. The executive, a man accustomed to holding all the cards, watched in disbelief as the numbers above the elevator blinked, signalling Dean's ascent to the ground floor and out of his life. Back in the boardroom, Harrison paced. The contract, thick with clauses and zeros, lay untouched on the polished mahogany. His assistant, Miss Jenkins, timidly offered, "Perhaps he just needs to cool off, sir." Harrison scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Cool off? Over a minor disagreement?" He replayed his words, the casual jab at Dean's eldest daughter's unconventional career choice, a comment he'd thought harmless, a playful barb to assert dominance. He hadn't seen the sudden hardening in Dean's eyes, the way the air in the room had suddenly chilled. It wasn't about money for Dean, it was about something far more fundamental. Harrison slumped into his chair, the room feeling vast and hollow. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city, a city that suddenly felt much smaller, much colder. Whispers through Hollywood. The clatter of silverware from the commissary below still echoed faintly as Arthur Vance stormed into his office, the plush carpet doing little to absorb the tremor in his stride. He flung the latest box office projections onto his mahogany desk, the numbers a garish testament to the studio's declining fortunes. "He's still not calling back." Vance's voice was a tight wire, stretched taut. His assistant, Margaret, a woman whose composure rarely wavered, shifted uncomfortably. "No, Mr. Vance. His agent said he's unavailable permanently," Vance scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Permanently? We're talking about a multi-picture deal, Margaret. A fortune. He'll come around. They always do." He paced, the scented of expensive cigar smoke clinging to his suit. "He's playing hardball, trying to squeeze another percentage point. I know his game." Across town, in the quietude of his Beverly Hills home, Dean watched his children chase their dog across the manicured lawn. The phone, a black obelisk on the polished end table, remained silent. He'd told his agent in no uncertain terms that the conversation was clothesbands. The slight to his family, the casual dismissal of their worth, had sealed it. The money, the headlines, the glitz, it all faded to irrelevance beside the sting of disrespect. His wife, Jeanne, placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Are you sure, Dino? It's a lot to walk away from." He met her gaze, deep, unwavering certainty in his eyes. "Some things are worth more than any contract, doll. Always." He squeezed her hand. The Hollywood grapevine, a notoriously swift and brutal entity, was already buzzing with the news. A major star, a guaranteed moneymaker, had vanished from the negotiating table over a personal slight. The audacity, the sheer unyielding principle, was an anomaly that sent ripples of disbelief through every corner of the industry. The unspoken rule, that business always trumps sentiment, had just been shattered. Vance, meanwhile, was convinced it was a bluff, an elaborate ploy. The studio, however, was starting to sweat. The unbreakable boundary. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the opulent chandelier, reflecting the tense faces of the studio executives. Miles Corbin, a man whose tailored suit seemed to shrink his already diminutive stature, smirked. "Dean, we're talking about a multi-picture deal. You're asking for an astronomical percentage, and frankly, your recent familial distractions have been noted. Perhaps you should focus more on your craft and less on your entourage." The unspoken word, family, hung heavy and dripping with disdain. Dean Martin, who had been idly swirling the amber liquid in his glass, set it down with a soft, deliberate thud. His eyes, usually crinkling with good humour, were suddenly cold like polished steel. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply pushed his chair back, the scrape a harsh sound in the sudden silence. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low rumble, "it seems we've reached an impasse." Corbin scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Don't be dramatic, Dean. We'll find a middle ground. Think of the zeros on that check." Dean merely offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He walked out, his stride unhurried, leaving behind a room full of bewildered power brokers and a contract worth millions untouched. The heavy oak doors swung shut with a definitive thump. Corbin blinked, then leaned back. "He'll be back," he declared, a forced confidence in his tone. "He always does." But Dean never did. The industry buzzed, unable to comprehend such an act of defiant principle. A line had been drawn, sharper and more permanent than any contract clause. A legacy of principle. The polished mahogany conference table mirrored the strained expressions of the executives gathered under the studio's harsh lights. Mr. Hander and Mr. Henderson, his silk tie askew, cleared his throat. Now, Dean, regarding the residuals for the international distribution, we've meticulously analysed the figures, and frankly your asking price, particularly given your family situation, strikes us as rather exorbitant. A sudden hush descended, heavy and palpable. Dean's usually relaxed bearing stiffened. His eyes, just moments ago alight with amusement, now hardened to glacial chips of ice. Henderson, seemingly oblivious, pressed on. With the ongoing complexities, a slightly reduced upfront might prove more amenable to the board. Dean's chair screeched against the burnished floor as he rose. There was no outburst, no theatrical gesture, just a quiet, deliberate movement. His gaze swept the room, finally settling on Henderson with an intensity that drained the colour from the executive's face. "My family," Dean stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "is not a complication." He buttoned his jacket with meticulous precision. "This meeting is concluded," Henderson stammered. "Dean, wait! We're discussing millions. Don't abandon this over a mere misunderstanding." Dean paused at the door, his hand resting on the cool brass knob. He looked back, not at Henderson, but at the other executives, their faces stunned. "Some things," he declared, his voice imbued with unexpected gravitas, "transcend any numerical valuation." Then he simply walked out, the soft click of the door echoing the profound finality of his departure. The room remained swathed in silence, the lingering scent of expensive cigar smoke now acrid and oppressive. The contract, an undisputed fortune, lay untouched, a silent testament on the table.